Hey, I'm Ryan. Today I'm going to be talking through my favorite books that I read within the last year. Now, I feel like I haven't been reading as much as I used to. I used to have a commute to work that I would read on the way there and the way back. But now I completely work from home, and with some other projects and things I've taken on, I just don't put in as many hours of reading as I used to. That said, when putting together this list, I was like, hey, I actually still read quite a bit. I have, I think, 17 books here to talk about that made my top books of the year. I don't know exactly where my count was for total books read, but I was like, okay, that's pretty good. It's still getting a lot of good books read every year. I enjoy reading a lot of nonfiction and fiction. I kind of alternate between. There's going to be a lot of books I talk about here that are definitely, in lanes of certain interests or things I have, but hopefully there's something here that maybe catches your interest, maybe find something new to throw on to your to-read list. But I'm going to start out with my honorable mentions. I've got 7 honorable mentions that I'll quick jump through. The first one I got here is Building Brand Communities: How Organizations Succeed by Creating Belonging. This is a very specific target audience for this book of someone who is trying to kind of build online community and do that well. And that is something that I have been in that brain space a lot lately. It's largely driven by my wife's art business stuff that we're looking to do some stuff with, but there's also some things with my, I have another YouTube channel called Roles in the Family that my brother and I do board game content that we kind of have some future looking things with community. So it's really something that I'm looking to learn more about how to do these kinds of things well. And this was a really good book on that front. It definitely is targeting a little bit more like organizations that are trying to integrate community as opposed to me as just an individual that's kind of doing this small operation thing. But there was still a lot of really good takeaways here, and I think it'll be a good reference moving forward. Next, I have The Growth Mindset Coach, a teacher's month-by-month handbook for empowering students to achieve. Now, I am not a teacher by trade, but I am a parent, and a parent who is likely going to be homeschooling my children. And so this is something that is obviously top of mind for me, is kind of like, how do I want to approach some of this? I'm really big on growth mindset and how do you encourage a growth mindset in kids. I mean, if I think of what do I want the outcomes of my kids out of school to be, coming out with a growth mindset, that mindset that, hey, I can learn anything, or any skill, or whatever is accessible to me if I just put in the work to do it. It's just a hugely empowering mindset to have in your life. And so this was a nice, very practical book of how to kind of integrate this into a classroom setting. And I definitely see this being one that I will refer back to for some ideas as we get further into kind of homeschooling as our children get older. Next, we have a fiction one here. I believe this is pronounced Papillon. This is a memoir from a French convict that is wild, borderline unbelievable, and from what I can have read, it sounds like a lot of the maybe accuracy of this is disputed, of how much of it is actually true to what may have happened, but still just a very compelling story about this convict trying to escape these prisons, and this adventure story and survival, and just speaks to the power of the human spirit to keep persevering. It honestly would probably be higher for me if I knew that it was more accurate. Once you introduce that, a lot of this may be kind of fabricated on top of the story, it makes it harder to deeply empathize and connect with it, because I don't know which parts to fully, connect with, but it was still a very compelling read. Next, another nonfiction one, we have Predictably Irrational: The Hidden Forces That Shape Our Decisions. I tend to like a lot of these kind of psychology, how our brains work, and how irrational humans actually are types of books. And this is a very interesting look into that and how it affects human decision-making, why we tend to make a lot of the same mistakes over and over. This maybe wasn't one of the books is one of my favorite books, is Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. This isn't the same lane as that, but I wouldn't say I enjoyed it quite as much as that one. I mean, actually, there's probably a decent gap between those two, but this one was still had some very interesting studies and takeaways that I found compelling. Next, we have the Ruthless Elimination of Hurry: How to Stay Emotionally Healthy and Spiritually Alive in the Chaos of the Modern World. These modern book titles keep getting longer and longer. This is really a case for just slowing down in a culture that's so obsessed with being busy and being productive, and how does that tie in, to kind of your faith life and these types of things. And for me, this was actually a really nice counterweight to the season of life I was in, I was kind of taking on more projects and things I was trying to do. So on one hand, I was really leaning into kind of ambition and getting things done. And so it was kind of nice to be reading this at the same time and kind of have those balancing each other to not fall into kind of the traps of either side, of, laziness on one side, but overly ambitious and busy on the other side. So definitely some practical tools in this one, and one that I could see coming back to and rereading in a different season of life and having different parts of it hit me in different ways. Next, we have a biography. This is Walt Disney, an American Original. I love a good biography that lets me just really go back to what this real person experienced in their life that had, an exceptional life. And Walt Disney is definitely someone who's pretty exceptional in his humble origins to then the huge empire that Disney is now. And it was interesting to hear kind of like the story behind it. And kind of just obviously there's so many story beats that introduce like, that movie and like, these things that you are familiar with. So you have some like grounding points in the biography to kind of tie to things that in your life. It's not probably up there with my favorite biographies of all time, but it's still one I enjoyed. And last honorable mention, we have Where the Crawdads Sing. I didn't know like anything about it other than it was a highly rated fiction story, and I enjoyed this one. It's kind of a coming of age mystery that's set in these marshlands where there's this main character that she's basically abandoned by her family and lives alone in the marsh. And then it kind of like has kind of a time jumping thing with, a murder mystery element, and you're kind of, curing the investigation in the present, but then it keeps jumping back to like the past and the timelines kind of start to intersect and kind of how it all pieces together. So I thought it was a pretty entertaining fiction read. But that brings us to my top 10 books of the year. These are the ones that I rated an 8 out of 10 or higher, which happened to come out to 10 books this year. And the first of those, number 10, is Number the Stars. This is a moving middle grade historical fiction novel that's set in Nazi-occupied Denmark. And, there's been several books that are in kind of this category of historical fiction around the time of World War II, Holocaust, through the eyes of like a young child. And this is another one that's just done really, really well. And there's so much that's set up here to pull at my, empathetic heartstrings of the situation. Anytime you go back into just like, what was it really like during that time period, is a really good perspective reset, I find. And this is one that, it was short and pretty accessible, but still kind of packed that punch that I think, I found to be very good for me from time to time, to be every year reading at least a couple books that are more in that, like, really get the perspective of what life was like for someone who was in a very challenging time period. It makes your problems feel a little smaller when you have that perspective. Next up, we have $100 million money models, How to Make Money. So this is a book by a popular YouTube entrepreneurial figure, Alex Hormozy, who I had found some of his YouTube stuff, and found that his way that he thinks and conveys a lot of these business concepts resonated with me. Very kind of tactical, practical applications of things. And I'd read his other books and found that I got some kind of good takeaways from them. And this one, I found I got some good takeaways as well. You got to kind of filter a little through depending on who you are. Like, it's definitely a little bit more of an angle of this, like, millionaire entrepreneurial bro energy of, let's try to make as much money as possible. And it can be a little, you got to kind of be able to take it and apply it to whatever you're trying to do. And so, but there's still so much here that's so tactical and just real strategies that you can kind of apply. And it really got me thinking about like different things with things that my wife and I are trying to do and how we can maybe, set things up better to do these business efforts more effectively. So I found these to actually be very practical, helpful books that I'll reference back to, even if I don't take everything in it as like, this is what I'm going to do to be exactly like this guy. Staying very much in the same lane, at number 8, I have Predictable Profits. Transform your business from one-off sales to recurring revenue with memberships and subscriptions. This is very much tied to kind of some of these new efforts my wife and I are looking into for online community building and how to kind of build some business things around that. This is from another popular guy I found through YouTube that does a lot of stuff around memberships. And this was just another practical book about, how to effectively create membership subscriptions and do these types of things well and with a strong business mindset. So you could tell a lane that I'm in this year. Just taking in a lot of data and learnings around all these things so I can kind of, approach these things more effectively. Next up, we have another business related book. This is The Mom Test: How to Talk to Customers and Learn If Your Business is a Good Idea When Everyone is Lying to You. This is a book that I think the cover is not doing it any favors. You see the mom test and it's this bright pink. Your initial reaction would be it's like about like pregnancy or new moms or something. You're not thinking, oh, this is like a business book about product development. But it's a very good short book about product development. And specifically how when you're talking to your target audience to try to learn about what they want out of a product, it's really hard to get good information and not just get people. It calls it the mom test because it's like, how do you get honest feedback from your mom instead of her just telling you that she likes your idea? And so a lot of this is like, how do you not lead with your solution in such a way that they're just going to validate what giving you what you want to hear, but rather shifting it to really asking them about their experience and uncovering their pain points without even introducing your ideas and biasing the conversation with those things. So I thought this was a very practical, like if you're someone that is in any kind of like product development of trying to create things to serve a target audience, I think this is a very practical book to get the good information for validating those kinds of business and product ideas. Let's get out of business lane here a little bit. We'll stay nonfiction though. We've got Factfulness: 10 Reasons We're Wrong About the World and Why Things Are Better Than You Think. This is kind of a data-driven, it's kind of challenging the pessimistic assumptions that many of us have about the state of the world. And it talks a lot about how a lot of people's mental model of how things in the world is like many years, 40 years outdated in how we think about things. And some of the, this is a little bit in the lane of something like Predictably Irrational, of some of these, just the ways humans aren't so rational in our thinking, or the ways we use something that's not a very solid data point as our main informing factor for how we view the world in a certain way. And I found this one just to be very interesting. It was just an interesting read, interesting, and, it definitely changed a little bit how I think about some of these global things, and it kind of gives you some practical tools to kind of fall back on, because these things the world is so complex. Like anything we think is going to be such a simplification of what things actually are. But he presents some kind of good frameworks in this book to help your simplifications to be a little bit more, accurate or reliable than your defaults would otherwise be. Next, at number 5, we have a very popular book, The Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank. This is one of those books that, how do you like rank this book? You know, it's in that lane I was talking about of like putting you back in that time period and empathizing with these people. But this was like the real diary. This isn't historical fiction. This is a girl's real diary as her family is hiding from the Nazis and ultimately are discovered. Like, it's such a gut punch to be reading this book and then it just like ends and then you realize what happened to her and her family afterwards. Is just, you know, it's hard. This is not an easy read, but it's paired with this really weird element of it's a young girl's diary as she's like growing up and going through puberty. And like, so there's that angle of it. If it almost feels like invasive to be reading, you know, this girl's diary. But it's also very kind of inspiring that her ambition in life was to become a writer that would be, you know, known. And that's exactly what, you know, ended up happening through her diary being published. It feels like one of those just like essential human reads, like just to, you know, we're what, 80 years removed from World War II, but 80 years isn't that long. And I think it's important and just good for people to be able to still empathize with that time period and kind of like realize it isn't just like pages in a history book. Like, these were like real people, that these were their lives. And Diary of a Young Girl is probably one of the better ways to exercise that type of empathy. But it's a little heavy. Let's get into some fiction. So at number 4, I've got Sea of Tranquility. This is by the same author that wrote Station 11, which I also quite enjoyed. And yeah, the author, I'm forgetting her name, Emily St. John Mandel, I think. Mandel. Really just beautiful prose. Just her writing style, I don't know how to describe it, but it's nice to read and it has a really nice flow to it. It's just well done. And this Sea of Tranquility is a cool story that kind of spans time and characters. You know, I love stories that play with time and things intersecting in ways that you weren't expecting. And this kind of blends some of that kind of science fiction, but then also like has very intimate kind of character studies on these individuals and their life experiences. So I just thought it's a really enjoyable read. It's also nice to have a book like this. It's just a standalone novel. I'm not signing up for a whole series. It just is one book, but gives you a really, really nice kind of, I guess it would be sci-fi, but it doesn't feel, it's definitely not as far into science fiction as a lot of things. Like, it feels a lot more like personal character study than a lot of other fiction. Speaking of sci-fi fiction, my number 3, and actually this is my highest fiction book of the year. This is Dark Matter. And this is like a mind-bending sci-fi thriller. You know, one of my favorite directors, well, my favorite movie director is Christopher Nolan. I love a lot of his movies like Inception and Interstellar and all these, and he plays a lot with time, and just like kind of these science fiction concepts. This almost feels like a story that he, you know, would maybe have made a movie about. It's about this physicist who kind of like, I don't want to give any spoilers here, but kind of ends up in a life that isn't his own. It's got a lot of twists and is very fast paced with what's happening. It's one of those books that's probably better the less you know, to go into it. But if you want kind of a thriller, it's got, you know, definitely some action in it. Definitely a page turner. This is one that I just absolutely went through very quickly and enjoyed it a lot. Number 2, I have Habits of the Household, Practicing the Story of God in Everyday Family Rhythms. Talked earlier about how I have young kids and, you know, you get thinking about how you're going to do school and things. But if you're, you know, a Christian parent, oftentimes thinking about how to go about that piece of it well, right? And raising your kids the right way. And in the day to day, it is so easy for that to just kind of get lost in the shuffle. And I think this is a very practical book on, in the year 2026, how to be bringing some of these, spiritual practices into your everyday routines and interaction with your kids. It kind of reframes the chaos of family life as opportunities for some of these things, instead of those things being at odds of like, we'll find time for this later, and oftentimes you don't find time. So I just found this is definitely a book that got me thinking a lot about how to be a better parent. It's a book that, even doing this list and looking at it, I'm like, man, I really need to go back and look through that book again and read through it a little, because you want to take some practical takeaways from it. And actually, and this is definitely a book that gives you a lot of those tools to be able to apply and not just stay in theory land. So yeah, as far as a lot of times with nonfiction, that's a good measure of, how good it was, at least if it's in the more self-help or personal growth categories, is how much did it actually affect my life? And this is one that I think did get me thinking about things and doing some things differently with my kids. And I could see it continuing to do that when I come back to it. So I definitely think any Christian parents out there, definitely check this one out. I think it's not a challenging or long read, and I think it just really has a lot of practical stuff that you can apply. But my number one pick of the year, and actually probably pretty comfortably, this was, I think, pretty easily my favorite read this year, and this is Shadow Divers. And this is this gripping, true story about these two amateur scuba divers that do shipwreck dives, where they're trying to find, lost treasures and stuff in these shipwrecks. But they discover a mysterious World War II German submarine that no one knew should be in this area, even though those things are all documented, for World War II. And it weaves together so many interesting things in this book. Because on one hand, you have the world of shipwreck diving, which I didn't know much about, and how dangerous it is, and the types of characters that it draws into this, and just scuba diving in general, and some of the challenges of scuba diving, how, when you are coming up, you need to stop at different depths and wait to allow your body to adjust to the pressure. That if you just come up quickly, that's what they call the bends, which is very, very bad and can kill you. But there's such an interesting tension here when you think of these people that are doing these shipwreck dives where they're searching for treasures I just want to look around in this one more room. I want to do this, but they need to make sure that they get back to do their levels of, I forget the word they use, depressurization or something. But you have to have enough oxygen to do that. So if you are too slow getting back, you now are in this place where it's I don't have enough oxygen to do it, but if I go too quickly, it can be a really, really bad situation. And so all of that stuff, that's just a very interesting dynamic in these shipwreck dives. But then you add in this mystery of this German U-boat, and now you're tying in this World War II history and trying to solve this mystery of what boat is this, or what submarine is this? Why is it here? And them trying to dive it, them trying to solve how to specifically dive and find any kind of identifying info on this. It just was such an interesting book. It was such an interesting book. So I think anybody that likes kind of history buffs or likes any kind of thrilling, this is definitely in that thriller category, is something like Into Thin Air is another one about the Everest climbs, about these kind of extreme human feats and the things that they go through to achieve these things. I think you'll really enjoy this. And for me personally, this was definitely the book this year that just grabbed me the most, and I found to be my favorite.